Hey everyone, Duke Nougat 3D here with another gas mask related review, and today I'm finally getting a chance to do a proper analysis on the Chinese industrial hoses, otherwise known as the quote-unquote normalized gas mask hoses. And the whole claim behind these is that they have a sort of weird thread pitch between NATO and GOST speculation 40mm that allows them to thread onto GOST masks while being adaptable to 40mm NATO threaded canisters, so that one could use modern CBRN rated canisters with older masks such as any Russian 40mm mask, so on and so forth. And I've done a bit of looking into it. I've done a bit of analysis on this hose itself, and there are several negative factors about this which does not support this case. I'm going to start off with the initial mechanical analysis. You may notice that right now it does not have the stockinette coating, or I guess it's not really stockinette because it's not really cotton. It's sort of a mesh nylon coating reminiscent of stockinette. That's the main problem with these hoses, is that the cement is notoriously weak. The threads are held in with 2 zip ties and a very scant amount of rubber cement, which is very pathetically weak. And any glue that's adhering any component on this hose can easily be just peeled away. It took me like less than an hour to get all the glue off of this hose entirely. So that is the main problem with these. Another thing is that the rubber that the hose is made out of, I believe it is silicone. There is evidence, at least in terms of smell and material tendencies, that is very similar to the Chinese silicone, and being that it is a silicone hose means that it is probably more than likely not CBRN rated. Not that these hoses I would trust for CBRN protection anyways, given that they are for industrial and they are not tested for any CBRN related threats. I do not have the zip ties on this anymore because obviously I've disassembled it, but another issue with these hoses is in the actual female thread portion. On most Russian GOST threads, there is a gasket which completely envelops the hose stem, but on these Chinese hoses, there is only an inlaid sort of shallow dish for this gasket to sit in. It can easily be peeled out, as you can see here. Although it tends to remain in place as long as it's seated there, but at the same time, it's kind of a area of failure, where especially given the fact that obviously the glue is very easy to peel away and very risky of these hoses coming apart. And obviously you want that gasket there if you want the hose to seal. And I've noticed that a lot of people saying, or beginning to realize, that these hoses do not seal with most 40mm NATO canisters all the way. And most people are chalking this up to their poor connection, like the zip ties used to hold it in place. And I can tell you that that is not a part of mechanical failure of the surfaces to meet with each other and make a proper seal. It's the fact that the canisters aren't threading in all the way. And I've got several 40mm canisters to test here. In fact, let me just pull this off and I'll thread that back onto the MF12 here. Absolutely love this. It's probably one of my favorite Chinese masks out of my collection. Give me one moment here. So I'll just be analyzing the female threads, because this is the most important moneymaker here, because we already know that the male threads can thread into GOST masks. This is primarily a GOST-based thread, but the whole claim to fame with these hoses is that the female threads can adapt to NATO canisters. So, starting off with one of the most notoriously difficult NATO 40mm canisters to thread into is the American C2A1 filter. And as you can see, this one's pretty scratched up because I've attempted to screw it into GOST masks in the past. You can see how well that does. So screwing it in initially, it's a bit difficult to actually find the beginning of the thread, which is typical with GOST threads and NATO male threads. And at first glance, it seems to initially thread in, but as you can see, that is not the case. It only threads in about, I'd say, 3/4 of the way in, and then it does not fully seat against the gasket, owing to poor seal and leakage, and therefore making the hose assembly entirely useless. God, I hate that. You could feel how it grinds against the metal. That is obviously a sign of a very unhealthy seal in relation to the threads. Next up, we have another notoriously difficult canister to thread into, the British PS10, which is entirely plastic, and I noticed that plastic canisters have a bit of tolerance in relation to GOST threads, but it's very picky as well. So, testing it on a PS10 filter, I can't even thread it in past that. Look at how much slack there is there. I can't even thread that in all the way. That's PS10 filters, no, doesn't thread into those. And Next is the MSA Opti Filter XL, which this is just a P100 filter. It's only good for CN and CS gas at most, and other than that, it's just a basic particulate filter. So not really something you'd use for CBRN protection, but as we can see, it does thread in like the C2A1, and this time it does almost sort of actually make a seal. It is a little bit loose up here, but I think that's just due to the nature of the fact that there isn't a rubber gasket completely enveloping the hose stem. So some plastic canisters will actually thread into these depending on the thread pitch and tolerances of the plastic itself, but there's no guarantee on which filters actually work with this, and I don't feel particularly inclined to buy a variety of canisters to test out these threads and kind of give you an idea which ones do work, because really that's kind of a moot point. Really, all you should be doing is buying a 40mm NATO mask if you want to have 40mm NATO canisters. And no, do not buy FP5 filters. I've already made a rant on that, and particularly reasons why is because those canisters are going to be expired. They're more than likely expired. Just because, you know, they're for a modern mask, and it doesn't necessarily mean that they're within expiry. And I know there's like a sort of planned obsolescence thing, but you still want to have very close tolerances to when the canister is expired. Like, you don't want to use it for legitimate protection if it's older than 10 years or so. So that's really my 2 cents. I really don't like making these filter safety videos, but I really feel like this had to have been pointed out because these are not normalized, as you call them. They're basically just a slightly more tolerant GOST, if at best, because really, out of all the 40mm NATO canisters I've tested on this, the MSA Opti Filter XL, which is not even CBRN rated, is the only filter that fits so far. So that's really all there had to be said about that. So if you have any comments, questions, corrections, or concerns, drop them in the comments below. I hope this cleared a few things up for people, and I'm sorry, but really, your best bet if you want legitimate CBRN protection is just not to get GOST masks. I can't stress that enough. I don't know why people... I know that there's a low budget thing, but really you got to consider it is you're paying for life insurance. You don't want to spend $20 on something that you're going to, protect yourself with. So that's really all my 2 cents. If you want to buy some stuff to LARP around with, that's fine. But if you're actually expecting legitimate protection, you aren't going to get it from a GP5 and an FP5 filter, much less with a Chinese hose. So that's all I have to say, so later.